The wind roared like 1,000 screaming voices. Daniel slammed the brakes of his 18-wheeler, tires skidding on the rain-slicked asphalt. Debris flew past his windshield, wooden beams, broken street signs, even a mangled bicycle. He hadn't even finished exhaling when he saw them. 3 figures standing in the middle of the road, trapped between a crumpled sedan and the skeletal remains of a gas station. His heart raced. "Hold on!" he yelled, though they couldn't. "Now hear him!" Without thinking, he yanked the door handle and leapt into the storm. Lightning split the sky as he dashed forward, every step a fight against the wind's violent push. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, clutching a child whose face was streaked with dirt and tears. The third figure, a man, was trying to pull a beam off the sedan's hood, but the wind was too strong. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the beam, muscles screaming with the effort, and shoved it aside. "Get in my truck now," he shouted, guiding them towards safety. A deafening crack split the night. Another roof ripped from its foundation. Daniel barely managed to haul the trembling mother and her child into the cab when the man stumbled and fell. "Help me!" the man gasped, struggling to stand. Daniel grabbed his arm, pulling him up just as a piece of metal slammed into the ground, inches from where they'd been. Inside the truck, the mother sobbed, clutching her child like a lifeline. Daniel slammed the door and hit the gas, the engine groaning in protest as the wind battered the rig. "Thank you," the man panted, voice hoarse. You saved us." Daniel risked a glance at him. The man's face was half hidden by a baseball cap, but something about his eyes, a flicker of recognition, made Daniel's gut twist. Who are you?" Daniel asked, heart thudding. The man's eyes darted toward the mother and child, then back at Daniel. "It's complicated," he whispered, voice barely audible. A bolt of lightning revealed a faint but unmistakable glint of something metallic in the man's hand. Daniel's stomach dropped. "What's that in your hand?" Daniel demanded, his voice trembling with confusion and fear. The man's lips pressed together in a grim line. You don't want to know." And then, with a thunderclap that rattled the windows, Daniel's world turned upside down. The truck barreled down the highway, water spraying in thick sheets from the giant tires. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel like a lifeline. Rain hammered the windshield, and the wipers fought desperately to keep the view clear. Behind the glass, the storm's fury continued to tear the world apart. Trees snapped like twigs, power lines sparked and arced, and the eerie howl of the tornado lingered in the air like a living thing. Inside the cab, the woman rocked the child gently, whispering soft, soothing words, but her trembling hands betrayed her terror. Daniel glanced at her often, feeling a strange mix of protectiveness and helplessness. "Is he okay?" Daniel asked, nodding toward the child. The woman's eyes met his, haunted but grateful. "He's scared, but he's breathing. That's what matters." Daniel swallowed hard. The child's small chest rose and fell with shallow, rapid breaths. It was enough to keep hope alive. The man in the cap sat stiffly, staring ahead but saying nothing. Daniel's curiosity burned. Who were these people? Why were they here, in the middle of a tornado zone? Finally, unable to resist, Daniel asked, "Look, I don't know what happened out there, but you can trust me. What's your story?" The man shifted uneasily, then sighed. "I'm Senator Mark Caldwell." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "A senator?" Daniel repeated, voice barely a whisper. Mark nodded grimly. "Yes, I was visiting the town to assess disaster relief needs, but the storm came faster than anyone expected." Daniel's mind raced. A senator? Here? Why hadn't he recognized him immediately? Before he could ask more, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then paled. "It's a message from the governor," Mark said, voice low. "Things are worse than we feared." Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine. The tornado was no ordinary storm. It was ripping through everything with ruthless speed and strength. Suddenly the radio crackled to life. A frantic voice called out warnings. of another twister forming just miles ahead. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. "We need to get out of here, fast," Mark nodded. "Agreed, but there's something you need to know." Daniel looked at him sharply. "The people we just saved. They aren't just random victims. They're part of something much bigger." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean?" Mark hesitated, then whispered, "This storm was no accident." The silence in the cab was heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the relentless roar of the storm outside. Daniel stared at Mark, disbelief and confusion mixing in his mind. "No accident? You mean someone caused this?" Mark's jaw clenched. "I don't have all the details yet, but my sources tell me there's more to this tornado than meets the eye." Daniel shook his head, trying to process the claim. He was a truck driver, not a politician or a conspiracy theorist. But the fear in Mark's eyes was real, and that was enough to make Daniel listen. Suddenly the truck jolted violently. Daniel slammed on the brakes, the rig fishtailing on the wet road. A massive oak tree had fallen across the highway ahead, blocking their path. Daniel cursed under his breath and looked to the others. "We're trapped." The woman's grip on her child tightened. "What now?" Mark's eyes scanned the dark horizon. "We need to find shelter. That storm is coming for us." Daniel took a deep breath, then nodded. He'd driven through worse weather, but nothing like this. "Okay," he said firmly. "We stick together. We find a safe place before the next twister hits." They abandoned the truck and sprinted toward a nearby farmhouse that looked sturdy, enough to hold against the wind. Inside, the old house creaked and groaned as the storm battered it from all sides. The family dog whimpered in the corner, sensing the fear hanging in the air. Daniel helped the woman settle her child on a makeshift bed, then stood by the window, watching the sky turn an angry shade of green. Mark sat down heavily at the kitchen table, pulling out a battered notebook. "I need to call my office, but the cell towers are down." Daniel's eyes narrowed. If this was no accident, then who's behind it? And why target this town? Mark looked up, haunted. "I'm afraid that answer will cost more lives before we find it." As the storm raged on outside, Daniel's thoughts drifted back to the moment he saw the glint in Mark's hand, a small metallic object hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket. What was it? And why had Mark been so secretive about it? Daniel's gut told him this was just the beginning, and as the wind howled through the cracks of the farmhouse, Daniel knew one thing for certain. This storm had changed everything. The farmhouse walls trembled as the storm's fury battered outside, but inside, a different kind of tension was building. Daniel paced the creaky floorboards, eyes flicking to the window every few seconds, watching the sky's angry swirl. Mark sat at the kitchen table, scribbling notes into his battered notebook, his face tight with worry. The woman, Sarah, still, rocked the child in her arms, whispering soft lullabies to keep him calm. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Okay, Senator, you said this storm wasn't an accident. You're going to have to explain. What do you mean?" Mark's gaze lifted, dark and serious. "I didn't want to say it out there on the road. Too risky. But the tornado, it was manipulated." Daniel blinked. "Manipulated? You're saying someone caused it?" Mark nodded slowly. "It sounds crazy. But my team picked up unusual readings, electromagnetic signals, right before the tornado formed, like something was interfering with nature itself." Sarah gasped, clutching her son tighter. "You mean someone made the tornado happen?" Mark's lips pressed together. "That's what it looks like." Daniel swallowed hard. "Why? Who would do something like this?" Mark hesitated, then whispered, "To send a message, to control, to punish." Daniel's head spun. This was bigger than a storm, bigger than any natural disaster he'd ever faced behind the wheel. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently. The dog growled low in the corner. Daniel moved quickly, checking the bolt. But the wind slammed the door open. A blast of cold air and rain swept in, scattering papers across the floor. "Close it!" Sarah shouted, panic rising in her voice. Daniel rushed to shut the door, fighting against the gale. Once sealed, he turned back to the group. "We're not safe here for long," Mark nodded grimly. "We need to move again, find a stronger shelter." Sarah looked down at her son. "But where? The storm's everywhere." Daniel's mind raced. The farmhouse was old but sturdy. The truck was gone, and the road was blocked. They had no way out. Mark suddenly stood up. "There's a bunker nearby, an old emergency shelter built years ago during the last big storm. It's reinforced underground. If we can get there, we might be safe." Daniel felt a flicker of hope. "How far?" "About a mile," Mark said. "But we have to move." Past. They gathered what little they could, a flashlight, some bottles of water, and a small first aid kit Daniel always kept in his truck. Sarah wrapped her son tightly in a blanket. Outside, the storm still screamed. Rain pounded the earth like hail, and the wind threatened to rip the trees from the ground. Daniel led the way, muscles straining against the gusts. Mark and Sarah followed closely, the child's soft whimpers barely audible over the chaos. Every step was a battle. Dirt and leaves whipped into their faces. A shattered tree branch snapped dangerously close. Halfway there, Mark stumbled. "My ankle!" he hissed, collapsing against a fence post. Daniel dropped to one knee. "You okay?" Mark shook his head. "Twisted it. I don't think I can walk much farther." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We can't leave you." Daniel looked around, desperately. "We'll have to carry him." Without hesitation, Sarah wrapped her arms around Mark's waist. Daniel grabbed his legs. Together, they pushed forward. The bunker's entrance finally appeared, a rusty metal door, half buried in the earth and covered in moss. Daniel fumbled with the handle, heart pounding as the storm howled behind them. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside, slammed it shut and locked it tight. Inside the bunker, the air was cold but still. The walls were concrete, lined with metal shelves filled with dusty emergency supplies, canned food, water, blankets, a hand-crank radio. Daniel set Mark down carefully on a narrow cot. Sarah settled beside her son, who was now asleep, exhausted. From the ordeal, Mark groaned softly. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniel nodded, exhaustion hitting him like a freight train. "We're safe here for now." Mark's eyes locked on Daniel's. "But not for long." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Mark's expression darkened. "I have enemies. People who don't want me uncovering this storm manipulation." Sarah gasped. "Enemies? Why would they want to hurt you?" Mark shook his head slowly. "Because I'm trying to expose a conspiracy. A powerful group using disasters to control communities, silence voices." Daniel's stomach churned. This was beyond anything he'd imagined when he saw those strangers in the road. Mark reached into his jacket and pulled out the small metallic object Daniel had seen before, a USB drive. "This contains evidence," Mark said. "Emails, recordings, proof of who's behind this." Daniel stared at it, feeling the weight of the moment. "We have to get this to the right people." Mark's eyes flickered with urgency. "If we survive this night, I promise we will." Suddenly, the bunker's radio crackled to life. A distorted voice broke through the static. "This is emergency broadcast. Tornado path changing. Seek shelter immediately." The message cut off abruptly. Daniel grabbed the radio, trying to tune it again. Static. No signal. "We're cut off," Daniel said. "No way to call for help." Sarah looked terrified. "What if the storm doesn't stop?" Mark clenched his fists. "It will have to, or we won't make it through." The hours dragged on, each minute stretched thin by fear and uncertainty. Daniel watched Sarah doze beside her son. Mark rested silently, face pale and tense. Outside, the wind screamed, trees creaked, and distant crashes echoed. Suddenly, the bunker's metal door rattled violently. Daniel jumped up, rushing over. "Who's there?" he shouted, voice shaking. "No." "Enter." only the storm's rage, but then, through the rain's roar, a faint voice whispered, a desperate plea carried on the wind. "Help, please." Daniel froze, heart pounding. "Someone's out there," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Mark stood unsteadily. "We have to see who it is." Daniel shook his head. "It could be a trap." Mark's gaze hardened. "If we don't help, we lose ourselves." Daniel unlocked the bunker door, stepping out into the storm with Mark and Sarah close behind. The rain stung their faces, and the wind threatened to knock them down. A figure lay crumpled against the mud, a young man, soaked and bleeding, eyes barely open. Daniel knelt beside him. "Who are you?" The man's lips trembled. "They're coming to finish what they started." Before Daniel could ask more, the man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into unconsciousness. Sarah gasped. "We have to get him inside." Daniel nodded, lifting the man with care. Inside, Mark examined the wounds. "We'll have to keep him stable." Daniel's mind raced. This stranger's warning confirmed what Mark had said. They were caught in something far bigger, more dangerous than any storm. Hours later, the storm began to wane. The first faint light of dawn crept through the bunker's tiny window. Daniel sat with the stranger, whose breathing was steady but weak. Mark and Sarah prepared a simple meal, their faces tired but determined. Daniel finally broke the silence. "We need to figure out who's behind this, and why." Mark nodded. "And we need to protect that evidence at all costs." Sarah looked at them, eyes full of fear and hope. "What if they come back?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Then we fight." The dawn's first light seeped weakly through the bunker's small window, casting long shadows on the cold concrete floor. Daniel sat beside the stranger, whose breathing was steady but shallow. Outside, the storm had finally passed, but the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on them all. Mark was busy setting up a makeshift bandage for the man's bleeding arm, his fingers working carefully despite the shakiness from exhaustion. Sarah rocked her son gently, whispering soothing words that barely masked her worry. Daniel glanced at Mark. "Who is this guy? What does he know?" Mark shook his head. "I don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's serious." Suddenly, the stranger's eyelids fluttered open. His eyes, clouded but fierce, locked onto Daniel. "They're coming back," he rasped. "They won't stop until everything's destroyed." Daniel swallowed hard. Who's coming?" The man's lips barely moved. "The ones behind the tornado. The ones who want to bury the truth. You have to protect the drive." Mark stiffened. "They know about the evidence. That means they're watching us." Sarah's hands trembled. "We need to get out of here." Daniel ran his hands through his hair. "But how? The roads are flooded and the storm knocked out the power for miles." Mark studied the man's face. "We have to contact someone, anyone we can trust." For hours they debated, planned, and waited. The stranger's condition worsened, and it became clear he wouldn't survive long without medical help. Yet outside, the world was silent. Too silent. Daniel kept glancing toward the bunker's heavy door, his nerves jangling. Who had the power to create a tornado? Who would risk so much to keep a secret hidden? Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from outside, a rustling, a shifting shadow. Daniel froze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah clutched her son closer. Mark reached slowly for the small flashlight. The door rattled again. Harder this time. Daniel stood abruptly, heart pounding. "We're not alone!" The stranger's eyes widened, panic flashing. "They've found us!" Daniel edged to the door, peeking through the tiny window. The grey morning light revealed nothing but trees and scattered debris. "Maybe it's just animals," Sarah whispered, voice trembling. But then a hand slammed against the metal door, hard, deliberate. Daniel jumped back. "No, it's them." Mark moved quickly to block the door, but the noise grew louder. Shouts could be heard, men's voices, rough and urgent. "Get ready," Mark said grimly. "This isn't a rescue." They had no choice. Daniel grabbed a heavy metal rod from a nearby shelf, while Sarah held her son tightly. Mark pulled the stranger to a corner, shielding him as best he could. The door shook violently. A shout rang out. "Open up! We know you're in there!" Daniel's voice was steady but firm. "We're not opening!" The banging continued, louder. Now, like a storm in itself. Suddenly, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Men in dark jackets flooded inside, guns drawn, eyes cold and hostile. Daniel swung the metal rod, hitting the first man's arm. The attacker stumbled back, growling. Chaos exploded inside the bunker. Sarah screamed as one man lunged toward her son. Mark grabbed the assailant's wrist, twisting with all his strength. Daniel fought fiercely, his adrenaline sharp and burning. But the attackers were many. One of the men barked, "Where's the drive?" "Hand it over." Mark gritted his teeth. "You'll never get it." The stranger moaned weakly from the floor, eyes glazed. Daniel saw a flash of steel and ducked just in time. A knife sliced through the air. Sarah shielded her son, tears streaming down her face. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he realized this was more than a fight for survival. This was war for the truth. Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the bunker. One of the attackers collapsed, clutching his chest. Mark's eyes widened. "Daniel, behind you!" Daniel twisted, seeing another man pointing a gun straight at him. Raised the rod, ready to block, but a powerful blow knocked him down. The world spun. When Daniel came to, the bunker was eerily silent. Sarah was curled beside her son, holding him tight. Mark was unconscious, a deep gash on his forehead. The attackers were gone. Daniel forced himself to sit up, every muscle aching. He looked around, heart heavy. The stranger was gone too. Only the small USB drive remained on the floor. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "We have to get out of here before they come back." Daniel nodded slowly, staring at the drive in his hand. "This isn't over," he said. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light on a world forever changed. The morning. Sun felt cold and distant as Daniel, Sarah, and the still weak Mark stumbled out of the bunker. The silence outside was unnatural, almost as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next disaster. Daniel's eyes scanned the horizon. The roads were flooded, trees uprooted, power lines twisted like metal snakes. This wasn't just the aftermath of a tornado. It felt like something much darker had taken root. Sarah wrapped her son tighter, his small face pale but steady in her arms. "We need to get to safety," she whispered, voice trembling but determined. Mark, still dizzy but resolute, nodded. "We can't stay out here. They'll come back." Daniel looked down at the USB, drive clenched in his fist. The key to everything, the secret that had already cost them so much. They moved cautiously toward the nearest highway, hoping to find a working car or at least some help. The silence was broken, only by the distant crash of broken trees and the occasional call of a bird or something more sinister. Suddenly, from behind a fallen oak, a shadow moved. Daniel froze, heart hammering. "Who's there?" he called, trying to keep his voice. Steady, a figure stepped forward. A woman, her clothes torn, face streaked with dirt and tears. "Thank God," she gasped. "I thought I was alone." Sarah instinctively took a step back, clutching her son. The woman's eyes were wild but desperate. "You have to help me. They took my brother. They said if I told anyone, he'd be gone forever." Mark exchanged a look with Daniel. "Who took him?" Daniel asked quietly. "The men in the dark jackets," she said, voice cracking. "The same ones who attacked you." The three exchanged grim looks. The mystery deepened. Who were these men? What did they want with the USB drive? The woman's brother, the stranger in the bunker. Daniel felt a surge of responsibility. They couldn't run. They had to fight back, to find answers, to protect the truth. As they moved toward a damaged pickup truck nearby, Mark suddenly stopped. "Wait," he said, squinting at the sky. "Look!" Dark clouds were gathering again, faster than any natural storm. The air thickened, buzzing with an electric tension. "Another one's coming," Sarah whispered, fear tightening her throat. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "This isn't natural. Someone's controlling this." The woman stepped forward, voice shaking. They want to wipe everything away, to bury the truth. They piled into the truck, hearts pounding as the engine sputtered to life. The sky roared as the wind picked up, whipping around the battered vehicle. The woman introduced herself as Emily. She explained that her brother, Jake, was a whistleblower, a scientist who'd uncovered dangerous experiments about weather manipulation and government cover-ups. Daniel's mind raced. Could the tornado really have been engineered? Was this some twisted weapon of destruction? Emily's story revealed a dark web of lies, power struggles, and betrayal. They used the tornado as a distraction, she said, tears streaming, to cover their tracks. Mark looked at the USB drive in Daniel's hand. This drive might hold the evidence Jake risked his life to save. Suddenly, the truck's radio crackled with a warning. Emergency broadcast. Tornado warning in your area. Take shelter immediately. The sky darkened rapidly as the storm unleashed its fury again. This time, closer, fiercer. Daniel gripped the wheel, sweat pouring down his face. We need to find shelter. Fast. The truck sped down the flooded highway, swerving past. Debris and abandoned cars. Emily's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Stop looking, or you lose everything, Sarah gasped. They're watching us. Mark's face was grim. We're running out of time. As the tornado bore down, the truck was slammed sideways by a powerful gust, skidding dangerously close to the edge of a ravine. Daniel fought to keep control, adrenaline surging. Hold on, he shouted. The vehicle lurched and rolled, then slammed hard against the ground. Everything went black. When Daniel came to, the world was upside down, rain pouring through the shattered windows. Sarah was groaning nearby, clutching her son. Emily was coughing, dazed but alive. Mark was unconscious, a deep cut on his forehead. Daniel unbuckled his seatbelt and crawled out, heart pounding. The storm was raging around them, but there was no sign of the dark-jacketed men. Is everyone okay? Daniel asked, voice hoarse. Sarah nodded weakly. We have to keep moving. We can't stay here. Emily's phone was gone, smashed in the crash. Daniel's grip tightened on the USB drive. They trudged through the storm toward a distant building, a weather monitoring station Emily remembered. If anywhere could hold answers, it was there. They reached the building. Daniel's phone buzzed unexpectedly. A message appeared. You're closer than you think, but the truth will cost you more than you know. Daniel's blood ran cold. Inside the station, they found rows of screens, blinking with weather data and satellite images. Emily pointed to a map. See this? The tornado's path was altered, guided. Mark stirred awake and gasped. This was no accident. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A cold voice came through the speaker system. Welcome, Daniel. We've been expecting you. The team froze. The storm outside raged, but inside, a new storm was beginning. One of secrets, lies, and deadly truths. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the chilling voice echoed through the weather stations. Speakers. The words felt like a poisoned drip seeping into every corner of his mind. Welcome, Daniel. We've been expecting you. He glanced at Sarah, whose eyes were wide with fear. Emily clutched her arm tightly, trying to stay calm. Mark was sitting up slowly, his head throbbing but alert. Daniel swallowed hard and stepped forward, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside. Who are you? What do you want? The voice replied, calm and cold. We want the USB drive. The evidence your friend Jake risked his life to secure. It belongs to us. Emily's fists clenched. Jake was trying to expose you, to stop your dangerous experiments. Expose the truth, the voice sneered. There is no truth, only power. Daniel's mind raced. They were dealing with a ruthless group. Government, corporations, both. Whoever they were, they had the technology and the reach to control. The weather, to engineer disasters and silence anyone who got too close. Why are you doing this? Sarah's voice trembled. Why destroy innocent lives? The voice softened, almost mocking. Progress requires sacrifice. Nature is our tool, and those who stand in our way must be removed. Emily shook her head in disbelief. You're monsters! Daniel stepped toward the console, eyes flicking over the screens, showing satellite data and weather models. We won't let you get away with this. The voice laughed, a harsh, cold sound. You don't get to decide. You'll see soon enough. Suddenly, the screens went black. The station plunged into darkness, save for the flashing red emergency lights. Power's out, Mark said, rubbing his head. We need to move. Daniel pulled out a flashlight and led the group toward a door labeled Secure Lab. If they want the drive, we can't let them have it. Inside, the lab was filled with strange machines humming faintly in the darkness. Emily's fingers traced a control panel. This is where Jake worked. If we can access his files, we might find a way to stop them. Daniel's heart pounded. Help me find his computer. They searched quickly and found a password-protected laptop. Emily tried a few codes from memory until the screen flickered to life. The files were horrifying: experiments to manipulate storms, tests on human subjects, and detailed plans for more destruction. Emily's voice broke as she read through the documents. Jake discovered they're planning a massive hurricane, one that could wipe out entire cities. Sarah gasped. We have to warn people. Daniel's jaw tightened. First, we need proof. The USB drive has everything. We need to get it to the authorities. Suddenly a sound echoed behind them. Footsteps. Hide! Daniel hissed. They ducked behind a lab bench as the door creaked open. Two men in dark jackets entered, scanning the room. Spread out. Find the drive, one said coldly. Daniel's heart hammered. They were inside the enemy stronghold. The men moved closer. One stopped near the console, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Emily held her breath. Suddenly, Daniel grabbed a metal pipe and struck the man's arm, sending him stumbling back. The second man raised a gun. Run! Daniel shouted. They bolted down a narrow corridor, footsteps pounding behind them. The chase was brutal. Daniel's legs burned as they sprinted through twisting hallways, dodging debris and broken glass. Mark helped Sarah, who struggled to keep pace with her injured son. Emily glanced back, panting. We need to find another way out. They reached a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit, locked tight. Daniel pounded on the control panel. The door hissed open just as the men rounded the corner. They spilled out into a storm-racked courtyard. The wind tore at their clothes as rain lashed down. The men followed, guns drawn. Daniel spotted a rusty pickup truck nearby. Get in! He yelled. They scrambled inside as the engine roared to life. The men fired, bullets shattering the windshield. Daniel swerved wildly, dodging trees and fallen power lines. Sarah held Mark close, shielding him from the flying glass. Emily scanned. The rear-view mirror. They're gaining on us. Suddenly, a massive tree fell across the road behind them, blocking their pursuers. Daniel didn't hesitate. Hold on! The truck crashed through underbrush, tires spinning in the mud. After what felt like an eternity, they burst onto a highway. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You can't run. The hurricane is coming, and you won't survive it. The group fell silent, dread settling like a stone in their stomachs. Emily looked at Daniel, voice steady despite the fear. We have to stop this, no matter what. Mark nodded weakly. For Jake, for everyone. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. For my son. The storm was no longer just nature's fury. It was a weapon, and Daniel knew their fight was far from over. The storm was howling louder than ever, a monstrous roar swallowing the world outside the battered truck windows. Daniel gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity as the rain hammered the windshield. The hurricane wasn't just a force of nature anymore. It was a weapon unleashed by those ruthless shadows they'd been fighting. Beside him, Sarah clutched Mark tight, whispering comforting words that barely masked her terror. Emily sat forward, laptop open, trying desperately to find a way to stop the destruction unfolding outside and the evil behind it. Daniel's mind raced, each turn of the wheel bringing them closer to an unknown fate. "We have to get this data to someone who can act," Emily said, voice shaking but determined. "The authorities need to know the truth. We can't let them unleash this storm." "But who do we trust?" Daniel asked. "After everything, the lies, the betrayal, how do we know anyone will listen?" Suddenly, the phone in Daniel's pocket buzzed again. This time it was a voice message. He pressed play, his heart pounding. "Daniel, this is Senator Collins. I owe you my life. I'm ready to help stop this." Daniel blinked in disbelief. The very man Emily had saved during the tornado. The one who was supposed to be untouchable, untarnished by corruption. "Where are you?" Daniel asked urgently. "I'm at a secure location. I have contacts in the government and the media who will listen, but time is running out." Minutes later, they pulled into a hidden safe house tucked away from prying eyes. The group hurried. Inside, shaking off rain and exhaustion, Senator Collins greeted them with grim resolve. "I never believed the rumors about weather manipulation until I saw the footage Emily recorded," he said, nodding toward the USB drive. "This goes deeper than anyone imagined." Emily connected the drive to a secure terminal. One by one, the files unfolded. Damning evidence of secret experiments, lives ruined, entire cities targeted as pawns in a sinister game for power. "I'll use my influence to expose this," Collins promised. "But you'll need to testify. This is bigger than just saving your lives. It's about saving millions." Sarah looked at Mark, who was now quiet but alert. "We have to do this. For him. For everyone." Daniel felt a flicker of hope amid the chaos. The fight wasn't over, but this time, they weren't alone. Days passed in a blur of interviews, meetings and planning. The media exploded with the senator's revelations. Investigations began, and the shadowy organization was forced to retreat, but not without striking back. One evening, as Daniel was leaving the safe house, he was confronted by a figure cloaked in darkness. "Stop this, Daniel," the voice warned. "You don't understand what you're up against." Daniel stood firm. "I understand enough to know that what you're doing is wrong, and it ends now." The figure vanished into the night. Weeks later, as the world watched the hurricane veer away from populated areas, a fragile peace settled. The truth was, out survivors began to heal. Emily and Daniel stood together, exhausted but unbroken. "We lost so much," Emily said quietly. "But we found something stronger, the courage to fight back." Daniel nodded, eyes reflecting the setting sun. "Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find who you really are." Sarah hugged Mark close, tears of relief streaming down her face. The storm had tested them all, but in the end, humanity's resilience shone through the darkest night. The end.